Hey everybody, we are talking about the U.S. occupation of Japan after World War II was over in the Pacific. And I do want to emphasize that even though the Allies and the United Nations had a presence in Japan, so it wasn't just the U.S., for all practical purposes, this was an American occupation of Japan, and the United States had a great deal of influence in reconstructing Japan after World War II. New question for this part of the unit on Japan: was the U.S. occupation of Japan largely beneficial or detrimental? Um, we'll look at the statement that the emperor released whenever the Japanese surrendered, and then we'll move on to the Allied occupation, looking at Reconstruction and this source I wanted you to look at on the 1947 Constitution. So that's what we're looking at today. This is a Time magazine image of someone who survived the atomic bomb in Hiroshima. And I just use it to show the scarring. You can see the scarring on his body, around his skin, and you can see where obviously the effect of the explosion this man carried with him for the rest of his life. This is an interesting point that a lot of students might not think about. If you like Japanese movies, if you like Godzilla, most people don't realize that the Godzilla movies started after the atomic bomb. So in the 1950s, this is the original Godzilla from 1954, they were really a metaphor for nuclear weapons. And you can see Godzilla here, huge monster attacking Japan. You can see the defense forces in the front here defending themselves. And then you can see Godzilla even has atomic breath, another obvious reference to atomic weapons. One of my students pointed this out to me in the past, that it's interesting when radiation affected Japan, Japanese culture created a monster with Godzilla. In the United States, whenever radiation affects somebody, American culture produces a superhero. I don't know what that means, but it is interesting to note the differences between the two cultures and how we've traditionally responded to nuclear weapons and radiation, these kinds of things. When the emperor released his surrender, he said, quote, "Moreover, the enemy has begun to employ a new and most cruel bomb, the power of which to do damage is indeed incalculable, taking the toll of many innocent lives. Should we continue to fight, not only would it result in an ultimate collapse and obliteration of the Japanese nation, but also it would lead to the total extinction of human civilization." Obviously, strong words in the wake of these atomic bombings, but the Japanese surrender, and the Allies uh, occupy Japan afterward. So I'll move my head here. I'm going to be in the way. Let me move my head down here. The Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers, SCAP, called SCAP, was U.S. General Douglas MacArthur. So he's the one who's put in charge of Japan after World War II. Had no experience in Japan. He had been stationed in the Philippines. And for whatever reason, the U.S. military deemed him qualified to go to Japan. But there's obviously differences between dealing with the Filipinos, who are mostly Catholic, and then going to East Asia with the Japanese, who are not mostly Catholic. So just an interesting point that he becomes the SCAP. Here he is with the emperor. You can see him. Obviously, the body language says something here. MacArthur doesn't look very happy at all in this image. His body language, he's turned away from the emperor. Of course, this is a staged photograph, but you can just see how they're responding, being together for the first time. And the most important thing I want to point out about MacArthur being SCAP is that he did a very smart thing. He did not want to divide Japan into occupation zones. And so Japan was never divided up into occupation zones. Other countries after World War II were divided up into occupation zones, and this was disastrous. I'll give you some examples. So here's Germany. After World War II, it went through division. And you can see here's the British zone, green zone, the yellow zone is the US, the blue zone is the French. And of course, the Soviets are communists, so they get red. All right, communism's always red. And you can see how these sections here will become West Germany, and then the red section, the Soviet Union section, will become East Germany. And this division of Germany between East and West continues to have consequences to this day. East Germany, that economy was suffered so greatly that there's something called brain drain, where all of the educated professors and medical doctors and other educated people left. They fled East Germany to get into the West. They saw what was coming and they got out. And that led to horrible consequences because the most educated people who could make the society better weren't there. Um, Now, they had to leave to save their lives in many cases, but still, you can see how creating this division really affected Germany for more than 40 years. Now, the Berlin Wall came down and the two countries became reunified as one whole Germany, but even to this day, there's still been consequences to that decision. The Korean Peninsula was divided up into North and South. Now, originally, the division was the 38th parallel, and that's why I've got this map here. Originally, this was the dividing line between the two regions, North Korea becoming communist and South Korea being heavily influenced by the United States to become a democracy. To this day, the division is here. This is the demilitarized zone that runs along this line. Um, but again, creating this division between North and South, these divisions are still there. We still have a North Korea and a South Korea, and North Korea continues to be a threat to global politics and international relations to this day. So, the United States did not divide Japan up into occupation zones, but what it did do was reconstruct the country, and there are three phases to this. The first phase is punish and reform. That took a first couple of years after the war was over. The second phase is economic recovery, and the third phase is independence and alliance. I want you to see there's a progression here from one phase to the next. The first phase, very simply put, is to punish the Japanese. The United States and the Allies waged war, Japanese lost, and they're going to receive punishment now. So punish the country and then reform the country. And we've talked about this some before. Reforms are usually top down. They're smaller changes compared to a revolution, which is bottom up and usually is a lot more violent and a lot more dramatic changes. So the first is to punish and reform. Then, once the Americans and the Allies are in Japan, they're making changes, they realize people are starving. They've got to get the economy boosted and regoing so that the Japanese people can sustain themselves and survive. So there's a period of economic recovery, and then there's this final phase where it's let's put the Japanese on track to be an independent country again, but let's make sure that we have an alliance with them so that the U.S. and the Japanese are forever intertwined as allies. And that takes place here near the end of this period. And this will lead us right into the Cold War. And all of this is happening at the same time, and it's all very closely related. I want to focus on punish and reform for now. These are just some examples of punishment. The United States told the Japanese, you cannot have these regions, these territories that you took over the course of several decades. So they tell the Japanese, you got to give back Korea. The Japanese had annexed in 1910. You see the date here. You got to give back Formosa, which is Taiwan. They took that after the First Sino-Japanese War, 1895. And you got to give back Manchukuo / Manchuria, which didn't belong to you anyway. So Japanese have to give back a lot of these territories that they accumulated over the course of several decades. And it's ironic that the Allies are requiring Japan to do this because you can look on this map and you can tell the British are these yellow areas. Here are the British. They've taken India and Burma, Myanmar here in the 1800s. You can see the French have a strong presence in Vietnam. The Americans are these bluish areas here, the Aleutian Islands and Midway, and far over here is Hawaii. And so it's just interesting that these are the punishments that the Japanese can't have territories that other countries have. So they have to dismantle their army, and their military officers are banned from holding political positions. This is a picture of the Japanese ammunition being dumped into the ocean. So I don't even know what the environmental impact of that was. It continues to be to this day, but all Japanese war industry had to stop. All armaments had to be dismantled. The Japanese could not have any of these military aspects to a society, and we'll look at that here in a second. In the Constitution of 1947, the United States and the Allies attempted to dissolve the large business conglomerates. These are called zaibatsu. They're not quite the same as monopolies, so try not to confuse those two things. Zaibatsu and U.S. monopolies are not quite the same thing. But there were these families in Japan who controlled a lot of the business, and the United States attempted to dissolve these. It didn't fully work. They were marginally successful in stopping these families from having so much control. Here's an image of one family's zaibatsu assets being seized. But nevertheless, that was one form of punishment. Now, of course, the biggest form that we will look at in more detail is the Tokyo War Crimes Trial, and we will look at that in more detail after this lecture. But nevertheless, those are forms of punishment that the U.S. imposed on Japan after the war. An example of reform, democratization. And so you can see here the political cartoon of what looks like a sumo wrestler holding up vote and discussion, exercise your democratic rights. Notice that democratic rights are representative here in the person's muscles, so it's going to take work. It's going to take work to lift up these democratic institutions, voting and having discussion. Here's another one where it says, forget timidity, get up and speak. And so it's encouraging people to exercise democratic rights. So there's going to be a new constitution in Japan in 1947. But before that, even before that, I do want to highlight something that came up in 1946. You don't have to memorize this, but it's called the Imperial Rescript on the construction of a new Japan. And what it says is this. The ties between us and our people have always stood upon mutual trust and affection. They do not depend upon mere legends and myths. They are not predicated on the false conception that the emperor is divine and that the Japanese people are superior to other races and fated to rule the world. So this Imperial Rescript is very significant because it's saying it's false to believe the emperor is godlike, is divine. And this went against Japanese Shinto tradition that said emperors were descended from the god Amaterasu. So a significant point here that the Japanese are being required here after the war to say the emperor is not godlike. Japanese people are not superior. And so that comes first, and then we have this new constitution in 1947. This is a very important document. Think about how this document is similar and how it's different from the Meiji Constitution in 1889. One of the most radical changes this constitution brought to Japan. How does it define the emperor's role? Those are all really important questions. Pay very close attention to Article 9. The renunciation of war article is huge, and you have to understand what role that has played in Japan's history, even up to the present. So that's all I've got for this particular lecture. Next time we're going to look at the Tokyo War Crimes Trial. This is a much longer reading, so begin looking at that now. It's an excerpt, it's a chapter out of a longer book that historian John Dower wrote. But I want you to start reading it and then go ahead and participate in the discussion online so that we can have something to talk about when we begin discussing this. That's all I got, folks, so have a great day. I'll see you next time.